Hey everybody, today we're going to be getting into chord inversions. Now that might sound like something kind of boring or very technical, but believe it or not, this is where things start to get very interesting. Once you start learning about how to invert chords, you can get very creative and start to do some really cool things. So the way we're going to start this, we're going to begin by working with the simplest chord that I can think of, I think everybody knows, and that's just a C major chord. Now, so far, we talked through how to make a chord like this. We went through how you start on a root note, and you find your next note, which is a third up, and then you find your fifth, root, third, fifth. But we kind of left it at that. We just played the chord just like that, and that was it. But believe it or not, this is not the only way to play this chord. In fact, this can be kind of a boring way to play this chord. There's lots of other different possibilities with playing a C major chord. One of the first and simplest things you can do with this is you can kind of double up some of the notes. If you look at what's in this chord, we just have C, E, and G. I could go up here and play another C, and I've kind of expanded this chord. I've made it sound a little broader, a little beefier, but I haven't actually changed anything in it. It still just has C, E, and G. So it's still just a C major chord. I could play any of the other notes in here. I could play an E up here, I could play a G, I could play all three if I wanted to. And I still haven't changed what chord I'm playing. I'm still just playing a C major chord. Now this is called voicing. When you take a chord and you kind of play the notes in different places, or you expand it or move things around, you refer to that as voicing the chord. You voice it differently. And there's lots of different ways to voice a chord. I haven't actually done any inversions yet, but you can start to see how you can expand this. So some other possibilities, I could take this chord right here, C chord again. I could take this C and I could play it down an octave. I could play it down here instead. And I still have those basic three notes, C, E, and G. Now this chord sounds a lot bigger and broader, still a C major chord. And this is kind of the basic principle of chord inversions. You can take a note and you can play it in a different octave, and you won't change the chord itself. I could take C, I can play it down here instead, I still have a C major chord. I could take E, play it down here instead, still C major chord. I could put my C down here, I could put my E right here, I could put the G all the way up here. Now this chord is very wide, but it's still just a C major. Now where this starts to get really interesting is when you do this. Let's take this basic shape again. If I take this C and I play it up here instead, I've actually moved it up over top of these other two notes. According to that rule, I still should have a C major chord. But this chord doesn't actually start on C anymore. Now it starts on E. But it is still a C major chord. And this is what's called an inverted chord. Now if you look at this, you might think, okay, that looks like an E chord. It starts on E, it's got the other two notes. At first glance, you might think, okay, this has got to be some kind of E chord. But it's actually not. If you think through it, one of the things I said when we were talking about basic chords was that when you do a chord, any two notes, whether you're doing a major chord or a minor chord or a seventh chord or any different kind, any two consecutive notes have to be a third apart. They can be a major third apart, or they can be a minor third apart, but that's it. They can't be any wider than that or closer together than that. So if you looked at these three notes here, you were thinking, okay, maybe this is an E chord. These first two obey that rule, E and G, so that's fine. But if you look at this last note, they're too far apart to sort of obey that principle of chords. So you'd have to think, okay, this actually can't be an E chord. This is a major third, these two are wider than that, so it doesn't fit that rule. Now, when I was talking about this the first time, I said, you just can't do this. You can't make a note farther away than a third. And that's true. You can't do that and still have an E chord. What happens if you start stretching the notes out too far, you just wind up playing a totally different chord. In this case, these three notes make a C chord. I'll go back to this real quick. Here's the C chord. By taking this C and putting it up here, I've still kept a C major chord, but now it's inverted. And it's not an E chord because it doesn't fit the rules of an E chord. So when I start with just these basic three notes, all in order, have my root, third, and fifth, this is what's called root position. And you can think of it as just kind of the normal way to play a chord. Root notes on the bottom, root position. If I take the C and put it on top, and now I have my E on the bottom, this is what's called first inversion. Basically, I've inverted it once. I took the bottom note, moved it up, and now I have a chord in first inversion. If If I took this note and moved it up 2, now that this G is on the bottom, this is called second inversion, because I've inverted it twice. Root position, first inversion, second inversion. Simple as that. Now you could do the same thing with a 7th chord. If you take like a C major 7th chord, I could invert it, take the C, put it up here. Now I have a C major 7th and first inversion. This would be second inversion. This would actually be third inversion. I've inverted it 3 times. You can't get a basic chord, like a triad, in third inversion because you don't have that many notes. But a 7th chord you can wind up with this. Hopefully that's clear enough. I'm going to give you some more practical examples. Now what I'm about to do, I'm about to get into chord progression, the series of chords. So if you're not familiar with that or you haven't watched what I've done on that stuff, I'd recommend looking at that now because you may not understand what I'm about to do. But this is where things get really useful. Let's say I have a basic chord progression. I'm going to be in the key of C. I'm going to start on my 1 chord, which is a C. And let's say I want to go from my 1 chord to my, let's see, we'll do 1, 4, 1, 4, 5, 1, the simple progression. So here's the 1 chord. My 4 chord, this F chord, is over here. My 5 chord is up here. Then I'll move back to my 1 chord. Now if I just play it like that, everything in root position, the music actually sounds kind of clunky. I'm having to move all the notes up, then shift them all down, and you can just hear everything moving really obviously. It's not a very smooth way of doing this. But if I use chord inversions, I can make this move a lot more smoothly. First example, if I start on my 1 chord and I want to go to my 4 chord, this one, instead of jumping all the way up and moving everything up there, I can invert this 4 chord to where I won't have to move so far. Let's invert it this way. I'll take this C up here and I'll put it down here, right? Remember, still same chord. I haven't changed anything. I've just inverted it. Now if you look at these 3 notes, this is an F chord in second inversion. Remember, if I started down here on the F chord, here's root position. If I put this F up here, I get first inversion. If I take this A and put it up here, I get second inversion. Right? So I could start on my C chord in root position. I could go to my F chord in second inversion, and all I have to do is just take these 2 notes and kind of slide them up. And now I'm right into my F chord. Now to move to my G chord, instead of jumping all the way up here, I could just play that G in second inversion also. So I can just kind of slide all these notes over just a whole step, and I wind up on my G chord. And same thing as before, this G is in second inversion. Here it is in root position, here it is in first inversion, here it is in second inversion. So I went from 1 chord to 4 chord just by sliding these 2 over, move everything up, I get to my 5 chord, and then it's not too far just to get back to my root chord, just like that. And that progression, by doing those inversions, ends up being much smoother than sitting here and jumping all the way across these chords. I'll show you one more chord progression. This time we'll do it in a minor key. And this will be a little bit more complicated, or more chords at least, but everything works out the same. All I'm going to do is invert some chords to get this progression to work real smoothly. So we'll be in E minor this time. I'm going to do we'll say 1, 6, 2, 5 progression. It's actually a really common one. It's a very nice chord progression. But if I did it all in root position, I would get this, my 1 chord. Here's my 6 chord, big jump. Here's my 2 chord, here's my 5 chord, and then back to my 1 chord. So that whole thing, it's very clunky sounding. So if I just use inversions, I can make that work much smoother. To get to my 6th chord, the C major chord, if you look at where I'm starting, this E minor, I'm actually already doing 2 of the notes in that C major. So I can keep these 2 right where they are. If I just take this B and move it up, I'm now doing a C chord in first inversion. So here's 1, here's my 6th chord, just like that. From there, I can keep this note right where it is. It's already in the chord I'm about to do. I just take these 2, move them up to there. Now I have my 2 chord. And then to get to my 5 chord, I can actually just move right to here. And this is my 5 chord, my B major chord in first inversion. I'll just go right back. Now, once I've worked all that out, I can start maybe applying patterns or melodies and start to work this together into an actual piece of music. but the chords themselves should be working really well now. So I'll play through this with a pattern. I'll put a melody on top so you can hear how this should work. So I'll start here. I'll just do this really simple, just kind of 3 notes in a row kind of pattern. Play 1 chord, 6, 2, 5, and here's a melody. And I can keep going or do whatever else I want to do. But there's a simple chord progression. All I did was invert the chords to make things work out smoothly, stick a really basic melody on top, and it starts to sound like actual music. So that's pretty much it for chord progressions. This is the kind of thing where it's a simple idea, but there are a lot of implications or a lot of different possibilities, especially when you get into inverting 7th chords. Moving things around, it starts to look really complicated. So if you're really interested in learning this, I would spend a good amount of time just playing a bunch of different chords, inverting them, looking for how all that stuff works, try to get used to that, and then start trying chord progressions. It can be a pretty difficult mental exercise to play through a chord progression and think about how to make things work out really smoothly. There's a lot of possibilities. You do all kinds of stuff. But I will leave it at that for today. So thanks for watching. Please leave me some feedback. Let me know what I can do next or what it wasn't clear. And I will see you next time. Thanks.